It's much better to use roofs for small gardens than the ground level land, because the air here is much better quality. We have to adopt the best practices from other countries and also adjust it to our context. Sometimes we might see very good examples of some projects, and unfortunately they are not scaled up. It's Californian Academy of Sciences. The roof of the building looks absolutely beautiful. You can see a 1 hectare square footage, and the plants used for this green area they are endemic to the territory of California. These plants are rarely seen in the wilderness nowadays, and such roof garden is a perfect place for the residents and tourists to see the old and endemic plants. They serve environmental purposes among other aesthetic purposes. We know about the functions of plants, and in such roof garden, these functions work perfectly well. This is also, such projects also serve educational purposes. They attract insects, also endemic insects, and this is important for the environment of the area. We have to definitely follow the suit of such projects. I am convinced that roof gardening is a great perspective for the future for big cities. There are no significant obstacles, material obstacles, only those in our heads. Of course, there are certain public standards that regulate such projects and activities, and we have to know them and follow the rules. But generally speaking, the vast majority of our tall buildings are suitable for roof gardens, with only exception of dilapidating and very, very old buildings. We often have this question about the load of the garden and how it would influence the materials, roof materials. I remember one of the meetings on the ministerial level in Ukraine, and we were having this discussion. So the deputy minister of infrastructure said, I don't understand why we still have so few roof gardens now. It's a great opportunity. We have to use it. And with many gardens on rooftops, we would probably make far better lives for Kiev citizens, and they will have no need to leave the city for weekends because they would have so many green spots in the city. Sometimes it is easier, of course, to have new constructions and new buildings already designed for roof gardens, but they can also be established on standard already existing buildings. As for the price of a square meter of new buildings designed for roof gardens, they are not, it is not so much higher than the prices at the moment. We can also think about extensive gardening as a way of saving resources. Such gardens are quite are very they are well tolerating unfavorable weather conditions, winds, and so on. Up to 10% of precipitation can be used for gardening on the rooftops. We cannot imagine how big the square footage of all the roofs in Kyiv and big cities are, and how overloaded the water sewage system in big city is. So with rooftop gardens, these sewage systems could be unloaded quite significantly. So those apartments that are at the top floors, just under the roof, they would have better thermal insulation and noise protection due to the gardens on the rooftop. That's a big advantage. Next point. There are some environmentally and economically significant aspects related to roof gardening, which are usually overlooked. Of course, improving urban environment is a good thing, and having roof gardens can be part of it, of course, that's no doubt, because air quality would be better. The smell of nice plants would improve the environment. The visual environment would also be improved. I will talk about the aesthetics a bit more later. On top of that all, gardens can play therapeutic role for city residents. And most important is environmental education. That's my conviction. I fully support Klaus Michael, a German scientist, who says that we have to facilitate positive sensations due to contact of nature, human and nature contact. We have to smell, we have to take a look, we have to touch, we have to feel empathy towards a plant or an animal. In all kinds of schools, starting from kindergarten probably and up to the universities, what are our most important goals is to develop the intelligence and cognitive abilities of our students, which also means that we have to develop this emotional intelligence. Dwellers of big cities tend to have low levels of emotional intelligence because they rarely have opportunities to get in contact with nature. So rooftop gardens could serve that purpose. Moving on. There is always this question about the safety and security of city rooftop gardens. Maybe some people walking in such gardens or spending time there could fall off the roof, or they can breathe in contaminated, polluted air. But that's actually nonsense, because the vast majority of all the contaminants, these fumes, they usually are in the bottom 2 meters of the city air layer. Unless, of course, we are talking about some major wood fires or something similar. speaking of the dust-wise pollutants and contaminants, they are normally flying in the air very close to the ground, not on the level of the roofs. So actually, on the level of rooftops, air is much better than on the streets. At the same time, we have to consider the amount, the volume of air that human lungs are processing in each day. So these pollutants, they are normally going through the lungs, and they might stay in the body of a person due to the time we spend every day on the streets, not because we go on the rooftops. Next question, whether it's sensible, economically speaking, to organize rooftop gardens. Yes, it is very, very economically sensible to have them. We have to remember about the aspect which was observed by Ukrainian and global practitioners. People are happy to have a small land plot to practice gardening with their families, with their kids in the city, not to commute too far. That might be a plot close to where you live. But if it's far away from where they live, who is going to take care of their plants? There was this study that showed that demand for land plots available for rent is quite high. If people, city dwellers who can rent such small land plots not far from where they live, whether it be on rooftop or elsewhere, they would be much happier. And it's very sensible to have medicinal plants and aromatic plants on rooftops, because they are quite durable with regard to winds, insulation, or sun rays, or just the opposite, the shading because of the neighboring buildings blocking the sun. And such plants are usually small. They are they smell nice, they are beautiful, but they're costly. In Kiev, I remember we had like a boom of this balcony gardening. And we could observe how many honeybees were flying around such balconies where they could have access to nice flowers. Honey produced by bees, even in from such gardens, can be very good. In our situation, it would be great to have such honey in the city. It's Hypersium officinalis. You can see 60 centimeters tall, or it can even be higher. It can taller than that. Apart from what I just mentioned about honey made of such plants, in literature we can also see that the evidence-based medicine says that the honey produced of medicinal plants is the best. what exactly can we say about the qualities of such honey? Usually it has some nice smell, and such plants can be used for food when they're really young, or as an addition to food. Some extracts can be extracts from these plants can be used for cooking, for medicines, for numerous purposes. That's also true for such plant as thyme. Is beautiful, smells nice. The honey produced from this plant is just perfect, and so on. It can be planted and be grown at the rooftop. Quite often we can see at websites how high the demand for organic plants is. So I believe rooftops can be used for this purpose. And this could be done with the use of warm rosum beds and principles of permaculture and similar principles. If we have this small surface area of one rooftop, we can have different plants grown there. Humus-rich soil is capable of neutralizing some harmful agents. With warm beds, this quality of soil is even increased. So such gardens can be very good for organic crops with high yield. We can harvest medicinal raw material from our plants on rooftops. But that would mean that they would not serve the environmental purposes. We have to always find this trade-off, the best trade-off between environmental and economical purposes. Okay, warm rosum beds will be covered the day after tomorrow. And now let me show you several examples. We definitely would benefit from this technology on rooftops. It can be very beneficial if we establish warm rosum beds in small containers. This would enable us to better structure the surface, and in each of the containers we can create the best soil, the best environment for the particular plant we chose. If we deal with allelopathic plants, we can separate them, or otherwise we can put them together into one container. It's also very convenient for people with disabilities to do gardening in containers. If you are in a wheelchair, it's easier for you to work with your plants if they are at the level where you sit. Here, I would say we could use one more resource, which is usually wasted. What I mean here is these ventilation spaces. We lose a lot of temperature in during cold season through these ventilation pipes. And we could use that temperature, that heat, for our plants. We can work with the ventilation pipes, distribute the heat in the best way so that we warm up the root systems of our plants, and see this phenomenon, which is observed in nature. Sometimes when the plants become just huge, 10 times taller than you can normally see them elsewhere.
But if you take it from here and plant to a different location, they're not going to grow that big. They're going to grow to their normal sizes. There were researches that identified that this happens because of the soil heating, moisture, and provision of mineral nutrition elements. And this results in a tropical scheme of an increased exchange of supplements, the minerals, everything circulates and results in producing such a very good soil. But this predominantly happens because of the heating of natural ecosystems, similarly to tropical conditions. So we can model this on a rooftop thanks to the heat dissipation of buildings. And then we get some decent harvest. A bit on other significance, other benefits of roof gardens. There is a science called the video ecology. This is the science that studies impact of environment on human health through the visual nerve. Nobody keeps mentioning it. It's like an underground science. But if you look at this natural environment, Alexandria Natural Park, we see that it's a beautiful environment. And the difference is existential. There is a natural environment that our eyes, not just the eyes, but a part of the brain that processes these signals, it formed 200 million years ago, the duration of human evolution. And it was growing on these this disperse evolution, with saccades in our eyes. That it's a French term. So something that our eye, it moves point by point, and we see a leaf, some waves on the water, which we are used to. But when we transfer to the picture on the left-hand side, we can see sharp corners. We can see asphalt. That this picture image has nothing in common with the one that we're used to evolutionary. And when we receive this counter-natural information, our brain starts dysfunction. And Tokyo is a champion is a leading city in suicides. Of course, massive green areas are going to fight the processes that I've mentioned before. Gardenotherapy is healthcare, garden healthcare. It's recreation, it's relaxation, it's rejuvenation of physical and mental health of a person through communicating with plants. And this has to be properly dosed. This could be individually selected for a person. So people need to know what kind of plants they're dealing with, what kind of peculiarities those plants have. So they have to recognize those plants. This could be also a part of an ecotherapy on your roof. It's recreation, relaxation, and restoration of physical and mental health through deliberate communication with ecosystems and its elements. Very often we see that biology students, they have this really narrow area that they're specialized in, but then they don't know what other trees are. They're like strangers to them. But biology students need to be aware and deliberately communicate with those plants, and this results in additional protection. Another very important aspect of video ecology is the color therapy. it's been established for a very long time that varied colors impact people in varied ways. It's individual, but there are general laws. The yellow color is perceived as a source of heat, warmth, light. It warms you up, and it raises your emotional background. Next, among our medical plants, we have experience of creating such color pattern that we want, that we have envisioned. And we can create, one of the things that we can create is monochromic garden. This is something that's been in the landscape design for a while. There are methods and techniques of creating it so that from the start of the spring and until the end of the season, only the goldenish or yellowish flowers grow. If we set this up, even succulent plants with really minimal area that require minimum upkeep, you can see that there's a pretty steep angle of this roof. Even here, we can plant plants with the shallow roots that don't require much upkeep, and they'll be able to stay there and create this golden garden that we talked about before, especially if we plant them one right next to each other. One of the things I want to mention is something that has not been given enough attention, is the plant that is called Hypersium perforatum. It's growing in open plains. It blossoms for the whole summer. It's a it has phytostatic properties, and there's a great medicine called sidristone. It was energizing and at the same time calming effect. It's a medicinal plant, and we can plant it on the roofs. There's a separate topic in the monochromic gardens. Wide gardens. This garden is not very wide, and it's located on the ground, but the principle is the same. Out of the plants that we have growing here indigenously, locally, so that we don't get to traducent plants. Same principle as with the garden on the rooftop of the San Francisco building. Those plants have to be local. We have a lot of white flowers, and the matter here is not only that. There are varied forms of flowers with varied color, like chamomile, for instance. We can create. There are varied kinds of such flowers, and we can create use a location for creativity somewhere on the rooftop above the normal life. Silverish garden gives you the feeling of coolness. Blue color gives you the feeling of space, calm, and again coolness. This is also very important. There are many shades and many flowers that can be used for this kind of a garden. This can be created from medicinal plants as well. So it's going to be a multi-purpose. It could be a multi-purpose garden. Red. I've also encountered a lot of among modern students. Unfortunately, there's a lot of students who are very slow in their reaction. They are not diagnosed with any sort of disease. So those are healthy people, but they just react slowly. Some people are overexcited, others are the opposite. And specifically for this category of students, maybe even for their remote education, if they had some sort of a corner on the roofs in these colors, this would help them because it facilitates brain activity. Or for instance, Echinacea. It's not only purple. There are other shades. It's a very much edible and very much useful plant. It attracts a lot of insects, and it creates very dense brush of one color. What I want to ask my colleagues about. So I read the Agroecology Institute that we cooperate with. They have an experimental station on growing medicinal plants nearby Poltava, and someone who works there, she's went through a very rigorous research, and she identified this very interesting relation that the Echinacea purpura, the purpura Echinacea, it stimulates some other plants. This research has been conducted very thoroughly, and it's a very valuable achievement. Where can we implement this? Where was it implemented? There are registered increases in biomass when you put Echinacea near Ortega, near Osimum, near Hypersium, near Medicinal, and near Dragonhead, near Targeti. So all of these plants is where we can place Echinacea near. Nobody, it's a bicycle, it's a wheel that has been invented already, but nobody uses it. I received feedback. Can you go further, please? Have you ever seen such areas of flowers, as groups of flowers, where you would have Echinacea in the middle, and then separate petals of all those mentioned medicinal flowers? All of them are edible. All of them are. There is no word of no permaculture mentioned in that article, but according to the principles of permacultures, we don't need to waste any extra spend any extra efforts on maintaining these flower benches, because there is Echinacea in the center, and this would allow us to put more greenery in the cities and make our environment much more healthy. Same principle could be applied to the rooftops. It doesn't require a lot of upkeep, because those plants, they support each other. So what I'd like to ask is, can we somehow implement these researches in practice, in our applied life? I always wanted to do something like that. It's such a shame to see those results not being noticed or being wasted. As for expansion of biodiversity, clearly, if instead of a bare roof, we put some plants, and should they start growing there, we need to implement protection devices, measures. Even in a dense forest, in natural ecosystems, there's always lack of in accommodation space, in habitation space, especially for bigger animals. This causes the fact that they cannot put their nests anywhere, but if they don't find any nests, they're not going to populate. That's why in older times, forestry upkeepers, supervisors, they had a plan of how many homes for houses for which birds to allocate. But if it's an old forest with a lot of elderly trees where birds can live, that's one thing. But if it's a young forest, there's nowhere to hide. So we have to implement protection measures. Like, this is a wasp. Where can it live? It can live in the holes, in those logs, or in those straws, but there has to be would protect such wasps from birds. This is an ecology educational work that is very useful for the younger generation, for the children, where how they can look at this at a closer distance. Another plant that I wanted to mention, especially considering the roof gardens and city gardens, for wind protection. Everything is great on the roof, but the winds there can be very strong. And I think Caragana arborescens is a very useful plant here. It's very used to dry conditions, even droughty conditions. It's adapted here in Ukraine, and the most important thing is that it's a medicinal plant, and it's also edible, and its flowers. We don't normally eat flowers, but I have data from multiple official and unofficial sources that boiled flowers of Caragana, they're not just a delicacy, but they're not a delicacy, but they have an overall health improvement function. It improves the health of central nervous system, generally the body of a human. And it can be considered like a ritual food to bring the person back from the dead. It also produces honey. These flowers are not delicacy, but they can be used instead of beans or peas. And we can form such wind protection barriers in the areas where winds can affect roof gardens in a bad way. And about green energy, let's talk about that. When I used to travel west to Zhytomyr, to Vinnytsia, to Rivne, and further, I've had a couple of chances to see a chopped down wood block and a whole field of solar panels. It's an extremely outstanding, so to say, ecological deed. I think those areas should be green, but if you can use those solar panels, place them on the roof. That will keep extra heat out, and it's much better. Of course, it's much better to have green roof. In this picture, the solar panels are too low, so no flowers are going to grow underneath them. But if you put them at 1.5 meters, at least 1.5 meters tall, the shade from it is going to move with time during the day, and flowers are going to be able to grow there. Next, please. Now, automated mini modules for balconies or houses for all year gardenery. In Kyiv, this area has started developing at a very high tempo. A couple of years ago, economics used to conduct periodical training in this area on how to do, what to do, where to take seeds from, how to treat these plants. All went well, apart from the fact that this is not a permaculture. There's a way out from this situation. If we combine everything that good about this plan, all the benefits of this plan, and produce such multi-layer systems with special lighting, it facilitates growth of plants. But if it's a hydroponic system or growing in such a small containers, it's almost hydroponic. So the soil is needed, and soil is needed, water is needed, and fertilizer is needed. So we need to change soil here quite often. That's about 10 years ago. Everybody started developing the area of, especially in rich offices, to mount such huge fish bowls where people would grow fish and then use it for food. And water from those fish bowls would be used to irrigate salads that was growing right next to those fish bowls. So this water was used for watering salads. Specifically, this water that contains fish's excrements, it's the most useful for watering gardens and kitchen gardens. So if you have a pond nearby you, use the water from that pond to water your garden. Use an irrigation method. Place that water to a higher location so that you need to place one of the vessels at a lower level than the pond level, accumulate water from there, and then distribute it across your garden or a kitchen garden. It's a very so this effort pays off. If instead such containers, tiny containers that you have here, like 20 by 60 centimeters or so, 15 centimeters tall, 750 hryvnia per, those containers were on sale in supermarkets. They were very, very popular. But those are tiny containers. You can use you can use it to plant plants a couple of times because of the soil requirements. But a bigger container with proper lighting. This is the smallest module of the worm rosum bed. This provides all year harvest and utilizes or disposes of your organic waste. This is a form of home gardening. This would work in summer normally. In winter, there is a lack of light, so you need additional light. But such a container will provide an ability to recycle all the waste coming from such flowers. Every family produces an enormous amount of organic waste, from bananas, apples, onions, and everything. All of that you can utilize here, and paper as well, by the way. This resolves several issues. So to summarize, any roof can be a true permaculture art piece, both useful and beautiful, and stick to the nature respect and with proper treatment of nature. Thank you for your attention, and I am ready to answer your questions if there's any. Thank you, Valentyna, for this wonderful presentation. What I suggest to facilitate this quicker, because in 7 minutes we have to set our interpreters free. So the question is, what soils do you use to produce a bed of Echinacea? You know what? There's a reference to the link, and I can't remember this detail, but I remember the idea of such a combination really well. So please follow the link in the presentation and read the article yourself. It contains all the details. And there's another question from Miss Lyubov Margita. Good evening, Valentyna Alexeyevna. Glad to be a student again. Thank you for a very interesting presentation. This is all of this presentation alone pays off visiting this autumn school. The question is, so you mentioned apiary, beekeeping. It's a very lucrative idea, very nice one. The only thing that I'm worried about, concerned about, and maybe you could share your experience, is the reaction response of your neighbors if you set bee houses in your balcony. I don't think many neighbors will share your fascination with permaculture. Yeah, well, you know, my house is my fortress, first of all. Secondly, I've been witnessing all of this in a very non-permissive environment, in the northern part of a building at 11th floor on the balcony. So that bee house, those bees are flying to their bee house. They're never going to the neighbors, so they know their home really well. Why I'm asking this question is that because I had an experience, a person in the village received or set up an apiary, and her neighbor submitted a complaint to the police, stating that she has allergies to bees. But the problem is that that neighbor had allergies to anything that moves or grows. So the problem is not the bees. Yeah, those are interpersonal relationships. That doesn't matter. Yeah, it's better to have nice relationships with your neighbors. And a related question, and that's okay, is there a limit for a floor where insects can reach? Yeah, yes, bees are not great, don't fly that well, but they could reach the 11th floor. I looked into the beekeeping in New York, and there's a community there, a Roof Beekeepers Society of New York, and they put those bee houses on skyscrapers. So the bees are staying horizontally, flying horizontally. So they work in those gardens. There are several skyscrapers, one next to each other, and they are within reach of each other. And those bees flying either on one skyscraper or travel between those skyscrapers. So there has to be a certain amount of flowers. In the United States, of course, in New York, there's nothing. Nobody says that the bees should fly all the way up and down. But here in Ukraine, I saw them flying, reaching 11th floor. They would fly down to some sort of a garden, and then on the cold northern side of the building, they would travel all the way to 11th floor. Yeah, their feeding distance is 3 to 5 kilometers, though the range of how far they would go for food. Yes. Height-wise, elevation-wise, I am not sure. I know that they work vertically there. On Echinacea, Alexander tells us that this plant is not very demanding to soil. It likes neutrally acidic grunt. On lightly alkaline and sandy soils, it does grow, but in the latter case, you need to increase the amount of watering and nutrition introduction. It's a great plant. Yes. It was very surprising to see that this is also it's something that cattle could eat. Are there any more questions? Just to add, Valentyna, you mentioned about the economical component because this roof gardening increases the price of construction by 8%. But in Canada, when there is a roof garden, your property then costs 20 to 30% more. Even in Kyiv, in Novopechersky Lipki, where there are no trees nearby the buildings, but there are gardens on sections between buildings with similar roofs, and you know how much those apartments there cost. And we also have developers. For instance, on the Obolon station, probably greedy ones, they have requirements for green areas nearby buildings. And what they did is they took this territory for construction, built a three-story section there, and placed this kind of a green garden on the rooftop. So it does work, and it's economically feasible, and it's economically lucrative, even beneficial. Okay, I'll add then those calculations that I mentioned. Those were conducted by the ministry and the company. So it was a joint effort by the ministry and the German company that entered our market and tries to improve the green environment of our cities, but nobody treats it seriously for some reason. So we have a 15-story house with the garden and without the garden. So the cost of 1 square meter of the house, of the greenhouse, the price of square meter of the house of the apartment in the building with the green garden on the rooftop is by 10 cents, not per cents, but 10 cents more expensive. And that's a drop in the ocean. Those are all business stuff. Thanks, everyone. Thanks, Valentyna.